The year is 2081. Markus Plantor is standing before the doors of a derelict Tim Hortons, as all Tim Hortons are, in desperate need of a bathroom. This is Silli Little Stories. Today's is called The Door at Tim Hortons. Population density. That was the deciding factor when it came to the allocation of Tim Hortons across the cities, towns, villages, and of course, hamlets throughout Canada. Markus Plantor's hometown had 50,050 residents, giving its inhabitants 500.5 Tim Hortons to choose from. The subject of where exactly to build the half a Tim Hortons led to raucous debate during city council meetings. After months of infighting, adultering, and not looking both ways before crossing the street, a solution was found. The half a Tim Hortons would be conveniently located in the third stall of the basement bathrooms at Twisted, a gay nightclub in a sandstone building on the outskirts of downtown. Markus had been to Twisted on a few occasions, but he missed out on the toilet Tim Hortons as well as the other 500 his city had on offer because Markus Plantor had never stepped foot inside one. In fact, he didn't know anyone his age, 34 if you're wondering, who had been inside one. The reluctance to enter Tim Hortons was quite simple. Markus and his generation had developed a monomania for horror movies. You see, most Tim Hortons look abandoned. Their facades are falling away, and they resemble a scene from a slasher movie when a secondary character is brutally murdered as the main characters escape through the back door. These scenes, though fun to watch from the couch with a bag of chips, would be terrifying to encounter in real life, let alone get a coffee from. However, despite their fear of Tim Hortons, they all knew who Tim Horton was. Every Canadian did. This was thanks to grades 7, 8, and 9 social studies classes. In those 3 years of education, students were taught 3 key facts. Tim Horton was an NHL defenseman, a businessman, and at best, a mediocre drunk driver. Thanks to a rigorous curriculum, his knowledge of Tim Horton was academic, while his knowledge of Tim Hortons was anecdotal. What he did know of Tim Hortons came from the stories he'd heard from his grandfather. His grandfather served as his chauffeur to and from his early morning hockey practices. Every time they passed the decrepit Timmy's a block away from the rink, his grandfather would reminisce from the front seat. "Marky, you know what they used to have? Chili in a bowl of bread. Oh, it was delicious. We'd eat it with plastic spoons. Have you ever seen a plastic spoon? Anyways, they also had these small dough balls that were covered in powder or filled with jelly. You know what they called them, Marky?" Markus did know what they were called. He'd heard this story nearly every morning on the way to practice. "Timbits, Marky. Timbits. You get it? It's like the name." To Markus Plantor, these tales were as tangible as the Three Musketeers or the Second World War, stories from a bygone era. It was an era before the Competition Bureau rubber-stamped the acquisition of Tim Hortons. Who did it go to? The Americans, maybe? Nope. Another Canadian company. Of course not, you imbecile. It obviously went to a Brazilian conglomerate whose CEO salivated at the opportunity to bring an iconic Canadian brand to a new global customer base. As soon as the maple syrup shots were finished, as is the Canadian custom when completing a business deal, the new corporate overlords went to work. The Brazilians had ideas, and now they would implement them. These ideas included introducing new menu items nobody wanted, cutting cleaning staff hours from 8 to 12 minutes a shift, and enforcing painfully poor customer service. These initiatives were celebrated in Rio de Janeiro as visionary. However, as the losses cascaded each year, it became clear the Carnival was over. The end of the Carnival sent the executives scrambling. They were still wearing their feathers, their beads, and their sequins, but now they needed to save their bonuses and find any way out. Luckily for the Brazilians, there was a sucker who actually wanted to buy the decaying carcass of a once proud brand. The Canadian government. The acquisition of Tim Hortons was the first foray in a long series of failed attempts to implement Canadian identity through government intervention. Markus was still standing in front of the doors of the crumbling Tim Hortons. He still desperately needed to go to the bathroom, but every fiber of his being battled against the idea of pushing open the doors and going inside. In a bit of desperation, he pulled out his phone and searched for any other available bathroom, unmonitored alley, or park, at least 100 meters from a school, of course, within a 5-kilometer radius. It was an attempt he knew to be futile. Every park was within 100 meters of a school, every alley was monitored by the mega corporation Shoppaberry, and it was Sunday. All businesses, except Tim Hortons, were closed on Sundays. The implementation of Canadian identity was to blame. The implementation of Canadian identity can be traced back to the fiercely contested election of 2067. At the outset of the election season, a missed call during a charity hockey game led to an irreparable schism within the NDP. By the time the fat lady was singing, they had split into two distinct parties, the New Democratic Party and the New Democratic Party. The broken coalition made room for the renegade CLN, NDP, which we all know is the conservatively liberal, not New Democratic Party candidate Jim Pigeon Daniel Robson elected Prime Minister. A political outsider, Jim Pigeon Daniel Robson ran on a radical campaign of instilling Canadian identity. And in his inaugural speech from the basement of his parents' home in Regina, he shocked the nation, but not his supporters, with his first proclamation. CFL football would now be the country's official pastime. Jim Pigeon Daniel Robson, known to his friends as the Crow, was an oddity. His favorite color was gray, he refused to use spoons, and he hopscotched everywhere he went. His resume was equally varied. He'd been an Arbonne salesman, crypto enthusiast, Herbalife salesman, NFT collector, and a passionate follower of the Chicago School of Economics. The Chicago boys instilled a belief in the Crow about the benefits of competition, and as a result, he believed the CFL should compete with the NFL for viewership. Now, he was Prime Minister, and as the speech from his parents' basement continued, he once again shocked the nation with his second proclamation. All businesses, except for Tim Hortons, were mandated to close on Sundays, and all CFL games were to be scheduled on the day previously reserved for God. In the first year of Sunday CFL football, viewership was poor, so the Crow came up with a plan. He instructed his government to pour millions into cross-country ad campaigns encouraging Canadians, gently at first, to purchase a CFL TV package. It was simple. If you lived west of Manitoba, you'd purchase your CFL TV package from Rogers. If you lived east of Manitoba, you'd purchase your CFL TV package from Bell. Manitobans, being in the middle of the country, were offered the unique opportunity to purchase either. This drew the ire of British Columbia's Premier Kerry Harlan. He believed all Canadians should be offered a myriad of choices when it came to selecting their preferred CFL TV package. The Premier pressed the CRTC, imploring them to allow every Canadian the right to choose Rogers or Bell. Although his crusade was framed as another battle in the fight for freedom of choice, many believed, and the Premier articulated in news articles at the time, his complaints stemmed from a long-standing grudge and a seething hatred for Rogers. It was a grudge he would never get the chance to fully explain, because fortunately for the fragile fabric of the country, Premier Harlan died just a month after lodging his grievances with the CRTC. His death was due in part to an icy sidewalk just outside the Hotel Vancouver. At the time of his demise, Premier Harlan was running stark naked from his wife, who was wielding a comically large and recently sharpened steak knife. Ms. Harlan had found a medley of incriminating text messages on his phone, messages exchanged with his recently hired 23-year-old social media manager, Roxanne. A snooper at heart, the text messages spurred Ms. Harlan to dig deeper, leading her to a poorly concealed folder named Family Photos. It was immediately suspicious. Premier Harlan hated family photos, mostly because his son, as he and others thought, was odd-looking. Voters did not like odd-looking children. This was a lesson the Premier learned on his first campaign, and now he did everything in his power to avoid being seen with his odd-looking son in public, as well as in private. In defense of Premier Harlan, the poorly concealed family photos folder did contain photos. Working against that defense was the inconvenient fact that none of them featured his wife or their two normal-looking children. It was after seeing the photos in the folder that Miss Harlan then found the comically large and recently sharpened steak knife. Premier Harlan's death made headlines around the world. However, the scandalous details of his wife, the steak knife, the icy sidewalk, and his nudity were not what made headlines in Canada. What made headlines in Canada was the small, often overlooked detail that rarely made its way into the international papers. That little detail was the truck which turned right on Robson Street at the exact moment he slipped on the icy sidewalk and delivered the knockout blow belonged to Rogers TV. It turns out Premier Harlan's complaints fell on deaf ears as it became clear it didn't really matter if Canadians purchased Rogers or Bell. The ratings were grim. Grim to the point they stopped publishing them. Grim to the point the Crow instructed his cabinet to black out all NFL games, block all NFL streaming services, and mandated all Canadians purchase CFL TV packages under the threat of imprisonment. Now, Canadians wouldn't dare leave their homes without their cable bills, just in case they were pulled over by the RCMP or by the newly deputized and armed employees of Rogers and Bell. The implementation of Canadian identity was not going well. Despite this, glimmers of national unity emerged as Canadians came together, cable bills in hand, and like the geese named for them, arranged cross-country carpools aimed south. Sundays between September and February became the busiest day for border crossings. The winner so far in the quest to implement Canadian identity was not the CFL or its franchises, but the NFL teams closest to the Canadian border. Most Canadians picked their favorite NFL teams based off that proximity. It was no different for Markus and his wife Rebecca, who were avid Seattle Seahawks fans. And although he was a season ticket holder, he hadn't been to a game in years. This week's Seahawks game started in 30 minutes, and Markus needed to get to the secret enough underground NFL bar before it reached capacity. His bladder was currently reminding him it was at full capacity as he stared up at the faded Tim Hortons storefront, let out a resigned sigh, and pushed open the sickly door. Inside, it was dark. The windows hadn't been cleaned in years, so the sun had to fight through every stain and streak and smudge to make its presence known. The air resembled the debris that came after his sneeze and was now dancing about the restaurant, stirred by the sickly door. Through the haze, Markus spotted a solitary, smiling man, standing upright and completely still behind the counter. He wore a headset over a faded black Tim Hortons hat, a khaki shirt, khaki pants, and a name tag that read, "Hi, my name's Daryl." Markus could see the bathroom was tucked in the far back corner, to the left of the till, meaning he'd have to pass by Daryl to get there. Avoiding eye contact, he tepidly made his way towards the washroom when he heard a cheerfully robotic voice call out behind him, as if the name tag were talking to him in the upbeat, cheerful tone it displayed. "Excuse me, sir, you'll need to buy something." "Pardon?" Markus replied, turning back to Daryl. "Well, I don't make the rules, but you'll have to buy something if you want to use the washroom. I recommend a coffee. We are known for our coffee, sir." "Do you have anything else?" he asked, knowing there was little consensus on what Tim Hortons had become, but strong consensus on what Tim Hortons used to be, a place to get shitty coffee. This he knew from first-hand experience, because of a night he'd had with Rebecca when they first started dating. At that time, people often compared Tim Hortons coffee to toilet water. Rebecca thought it'd be fun to go to a Tim Hortons drive-thru, order 2 coffees double-double, and see if they were right. As they pulled out of the drive-thru and parked in an empty lot, coffees in hand, they felt as if they were partaking in something prohibited or taboo. Cautiously, they cheered each other and took their first sips. Immediately, and in unison, the coffee spewed from their mouths onto the dashboard and the windows and the steering wheel and the carpeted seats of Markus's Honda Accord. They looked each other in the eyes, laughed, and promised, never again. Daryl was unaware of this story and continued to press Markus to order a coffee. Well, we do have other items, sir, but I recommend the coffee. We are known for our coffee. Okay, I'll have a small coffee then, please. That is a really great choice you made, sir. Can I just say fantastic choice you have made. I'm going to get a plot started. It should be ready soon. With that, Daryl turned and disappeared into the back, leaving Markus alone at the till, listening to the opening notes of the coffee-making process. After a few moments of milling about, Markus decided to recommence his eastward journey towards the bathroom. His destination was a hallway with 2 doors. The first door had signage which said janitor. The other door had signage that said bathroom. Markus, needing to use a urinal, pushed open the door marked bathroom, and to his surprise, he did not find a bathroom, but instead he walked into a small hallway. At its end, there was a man wearing a suit, standing behind a podium, and an unmarked door to his left. The man looked at Markus. Markus looked at the man. He did not have a name tag or a headset, and before Markus could say anything, the man spoke. Hello and welcome to your opportunity to go through this door, the suited man behind the podium said as he gestured at the door to his left. Confused and a little off-put, Markus responded instinctively with the reason he was in this weird hallway in the first place. Look, buddy, I just want to go to the bathroom. Well, I've got some bad news. This is not the bathroom. This is your opportunity to go through that door, the suited man again said, adding some flair as he pointed at the door beside him. It literally says bathroom on that door, Markus gritted, gesturing at the door behind him. Well, in fairness to me, I did not put up those signs. All I am is your host, offering you the opportunity, for the 3rd time, to go through this door. This time, the suited man behind the podium incorporated some jazz hands as he gestured at the door beside him. Is there a bathroom behind it? The short answer is no-ish. Then I don't want to go through that door. Sir, I completely understand your hesitation, but would it change your mind if you knew that this was a special door? That this was a magic door? Markus peered at the man, opened his mouth to speak, lost the words, closed his mouth, collected his thoughts, opened his mouth again, and said, What do you mean, magic door? I mean, this is your once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to go through a magic door. In his mind, Markus could feel his hands firmly around the man's throat, squeezing with all his might as he screamed expletives into his face. He took comfort in the fantasy for a brief few seconds before returning to reality. Can you explain to me what exactly is magic about this door? Well, that's the best part about this door. It takes you wherever you desire to be in this exact moment. Irritation, frustration, and wrath boiled inside of Markus and erupted out. Okay, let me get this straight. What you were telling me is that if I wanted to be in Cancun sipping watered-down tequila at an all-inclusive resort, and I walked through that door, my next step would be onto a sandy beach surrounded by bloated Americans and sunburnt Canadians. Or if I wanted to be overlooking Paris from the top of the Eiffel Tower, cradling a baguette in one hand and my 6th cigarette of the day in the other, you're telling me if I enter this nondescript door in the back of a Tim Hortons no one has been to in years, I would find myself 296 meters above the ground in the City of Light. Well, sir, those are 2 great options. However, this door will only take you where you truly desire to be in this exact moment. So whether that's in Cancun with the fatties you were talking about, or with the smelly Frenchman out there in Paris, if you truly desire it right now, it will take you there. As the words from the suited man behind the podium hit his ears, Markus could hear the artificial honesty in his voice. It made him not want to return to the fantasy of stealing the last moments of life from the enigma in front of him. In this small, bizarre hallway, he felt his irritation, his frustration, his wrath slowly slipping away, replaced by something else. Something he hadn't felt in years. It was a feeling he'd run from, refused to feel, and actively avoided so much over the past decade, he believed this feeling was like the dodo bird, extinct within him. It had been so long since he felt this sensation that it caught him off guard, like a line in a song that makes you press pause. He struggled to name it as it spread throughout his body like a disease starting in his chest, slithering down his torso and crawling towards his head. This feeling was tenuous, as if it was already preparing to leave, scared it wasn't wanted, which made it fragile, so he tried to hold it softly, trying not to frighten it away as he had done so often in the past. This feeling he was desperately trying to hold on to, trying to figure out, that was consuming him, was hope. Hope that this door would take him where he truly desired to be, and the inane belief that it actually could. His heart was speeding up, beginning to pound in his chest because he knew what he desired. It was what he tried not to think about every day since the day it happened. What Markus Plantor wanted more than anything in the world was to be reunited with his wife. The last day Markus spent with his wife was Sunday, February 6, 2069. They were set to attend the Seattle Seahawks Week 14 matchup against the Indianapolis Colts. Rebecca and Markus were avid Seahawks fans. They hadn't missed a home game since their wedding. An hour before they were set to leave, Markus received a phone call. It was from his father. He'd fallen off a ladder and was in the hospital. As they spoke, Markus could hear someone in the background cutting in saying things like, "That's not what I told you," and "Because you tried to grab the nurse's ass, Larry." "Who you with, Dad?" "I'm with a child pretending to be a doctor. He's the one that made me call you in the first place." "Why don't you put him on? It seems like he has something to say." The doctor explained to Markus that his father had a cracked sternum, a concussion, and a cantankerous demeanor that was wearing on the staff. "It's just one game," Rebecca told him after he relayed the news from the doctor. "We should go see him." "I know. I just hate to see the tickets go to waste," Markus replied, his body urging him to abandon his father while his head fought back with a TED Talk. The talk reminded him that this was the man who bathed him as a child, taught him how to skate, and cried on his wedding day. "How about this? I'll go see my dad in the hospital and you call your sister Sarah. I'm sure she'd love to go to the game with you. For some ungodly reason, she's a Colts fan. It will be a humbling experience for her to watch them get blown out in person." It was looking like a blowout, 3 hands into a game of crib with his father, when Markus's life fell apart. An alert came blaring out of the TV hanging in the corner of the white-tiled room, interrupting a CFL game no one was watching. The Prime Minister, Jim Pigeon Daniel Robson, appeared on screen surrounded by a coterie of his ministers above a banner that read, "Special Announcement," in front of what appeared to be his parents' front yard in Regina. The Crow hopscotched to the podium, gripped its sides with his black leather gloves and announced, "My fellow Canadians, today is the day we grow stronger. Today is the day we grow more Canadian. Today is the day we say no thank you to every so-called Canadian who crossed the border to watch the filth that is the NFL. 4 downs in football is a slap in the face to our heritage, to our Canadian identity." His voice was rising, inching towards his crescendo. He raised his fist and slammed it down as he roared, "Today is the day we hear them loud and clear." The speech continued, uninterrupted, for another hour and 43 minutes. And, according to the Crow, if those who made the trip down south wished to watch the NFL over the CFL, if they wished to drink Starbucks over Tim Hortons, if they wished to say Z over Z, then they could live forever in the United States. The border would be permanently closed. All the seditious, traitorous Canadians would be barred from ever returning home. Rebecca and Sarah had been living in a makeshift refugee camp just outside Bellingham ever since. In the small hallway, Markus felt compelled to move closer to the mysterious door, like divine providence was pushing on his back. He placed his hand on the door and was flooded with memories of his last moments with Rebecca. The memories he desperately tried to cradle, but as time dragged on and the distance between them grew, he wished they would fade, diminish, and disappear. But now he was a doorway away from her. With his hand on that door, the suited man behind the podium to his left, The memories roared back. Memories of his hand on the cold passenger door of his sister-in-law's powder blue Honda Odyssey. The sound of the heavy thud it made as it shut, and the little wave Rebecca gave him through the window, obscured by the morning sun refracting off the glass. He could see the laughing smiles the sisters were sharing, the kind that leaves the uninvited audience wondering about its source. Maybe it was an inside joke. Maybe it was about him. On the sloped concrete, he could smell her perfume on his collar, remnants of her lingering on him, a byproduct of their last hug. A hug that was insignificant and routine. A hug that said, "I'll see you again tonight." Now, with his hand on this door in the back of a dilapidated Tim Hortons, a door he was convincing himself was truly magic, he felt the acidity of believing that the suited man behind the podium could be anything other than a snake oil salesman or a charlatan of the highest order. The fear of the unknown gripped him, but overriding it all was that tenuous, fragile, fleeting belief. It had been 12 years since he'd seen his wife. 12 years since he last kissed her. 12 years since he heard her laugh at the silly little voices he'd do for her at night. 12 years since their last "I love you." Now, for the first time in 12 years, he allowed himself to believe in hope. Markus turned his gaze from the door. He stared into the suited man behind the podium's eyes, and he asked him for a final time, "You're promising me, when I walk through this door, it's going to take me where I truly desire to be?" "I can't make promises, but I guarantee if you walk through this door, it will take you where you desire to be right now." Markus returned his gaze to the door, took a deep breath, and thrust it open. A blast of blinding white light, like a fire from a dragon's mouth, engulfed him, and the world spun violently. He felt as if he were plummeting from space, the wind screaming past his ears and slamming into his body, numbing every sense at once. Then, as suddenly as it began, the terrifying freefall ceased. His knees wobbled as his feet found themselves firmly on the ground. He opened his eyes, and as they slowly readjusted, he found himself standing outside of a derelict Tim Hortons in desperate need of a bathroom. So that was a silly little story, The Door at Tim Hortons. Written, edited, produced, and read by Zach Hodder. If you didn't like it, please don't tell me. My ego cannot handle it. Goodbye.